surgeon. I just want to see what she has to say. And
Yeah.
when the Globus Women's Network sent out, the email saying, hey, there's this female orthopedic surgeon. She's doing this podcast called The 6%. I was like, oh my gosh, I've got to do it.
Oh, how funny. And just it somehow ended up on their radar, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, cool. Oh, well, that's exciting. You've got an amazing story. I think that you're like just a perfect person as a guest for this. So I thank you for reaching out to me. I'm really glad you did. And I think in general, the support for this podcast when I announced that I was launching it and kind of ongoing has been really amazing. There seems to be just a lot of interest in stories like yours, and I'm getting a lot of good feedback. So thank you.
I love it. I think everybody's been wanting something like this. I think you're one of the first to really develop a podcast that's reaching out. And I love the name of it, the 6%. I mean, it's perfect. I've
Thank
wanted to be
you.
able to talk and share, because you being a female orthopedic surgeon, me working in orthopedics and spine, we are a
We're
very small.
unicorns.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, cool. So, well, I went ahead and started recording just so I don't forget to press record. This is not part of the podcast yet, but it'll get edited down. You sent me like an amazing bio, and I'll prompt you with questions, and you'll probably end up
Hmm.
repeating a lot of it. What I'll do is for my intro for you, it'll be kind of a little bit of a briefer synopsis and some highlights of what you've done and what you do now. But I'll end up asking you a lot of questions that'll go into your upbringing and your parents and kind of all your experiences to date. um, is there anything you don't I always ask the guests, like, is there anything you don't want to talk about?
I am an open book, because
Okay.
what I have been through to get where I am, even when I told the women, like at Globus and the Women's Network, I was selected, like the head of education started crying. She's like,
Oh,
finally, someone like can say what it's like for us. So I'm like,
that's
whatever you want to know.
awesome. I'm so excited. Okay, so then once we get started, I'll go over all of those things with you. I'll ask you questions, and if we go off on tangents, we go off on tangents. I have a very casual style, and the one thing that I'll wrap up with, or two things that I'll wrap up with generally, is just what is your one major piece of advice? What's your single piece of advice to a woman who wants to follow in your footsteps? And then I'll ask where people can find you online and follow you if they want to keep up with what you're doing. So you'll want to, just list your social media networks or whatever,
Hmm.
your handles at that point, and then we'll wrap up.
Absolutely.
Okay, good. And if there's anything that you get going talking about and it kind of doesn't quite come out right, you can say, hold on, cut all of that, and you can start over. I have somebody editing, and so we can, package it all up, make it shiny however you want.
Hmm. Okay.
All right. And I'm recording video. I've just done that. Actually so far haven't really found utility in it, and or I just haven't figured out how exactly to use it. So we're primarily just getting audio. But if at some point we do a little highlight snippet, I might use that.
Great. I like the face-to-face engagement. I think that makes it a
I
little bit more organic.
Yep, absolutely. I like that too. So that's, if anything, it serves that purpose. Okay, and so you are, just so when I get started, I make sure I kind of intro you right. You are still at Globus?
I am.
Okay. And what's your official role there now?
I'm a spine specialist.
Okay. And so are you still in the OR, or are you overseeing other people, or what's your day-to-day there?
I am still in the OR.
Great.
I'm not ready to leave that yet.
I know that's kind of the main draw, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's what brings a lot of people there in the first place. Okay, so surgical spine specialist, or I would say a spine specialist.
Spine
for
specialist.
Globus Houston or
Globus Medical. I'm
Globus
part of the
Medical
Houston team. Yeah,
in the
in the
Houston
Houston
team.
team.
Okay. All right. I'm just going to jot this down as I like say it. So I don't forget it.
Excuse me, I'm just going to
Spine
grab my water
specialist.
just so
Yeah,
I'm
please do.
okay. There we go.
At Globus Medical. Does Globus only do spine? Forgive my ignorance because I've not
No,
used
we
Globus
actually just
before.
launched a trauma line.
Oh, okay.
Maybe I think 2 years ago they launched their trauma line.
Okay. So surgical implants,
However, I only
spine
do
and
spine.
trauma, but you do spine.
Mhm.
Okay. All right. And Summer Shed is how we pronounce your name, right?
Yep.
All right. Okay, cool. All right. I will pause for a second and
Yeah.
then
Oh, we
and
do
then we'll just
robotics too. Excuse me.
Oh, okay.
We're
So
yeah, yeah.
I will
Sorry,
do
we
that.
have one of the number one robot on the market in the moment for spine surgery.
Surgical spine and trauma, surgical implants, and surgical robotics. Should I say that? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. We'll pause for a second, then we'll start.
Okay.
I'm so excited today to have on Summer Shed. She is, gosh, like so many things, but her official day job is that she is a spine specialist at Globus Medical. And Globus Medical is a company that makes surgical implants for spine and trauma and also deals in surgical robotics. And so, Summer, it is so exciting to have you here. Thank you so much for being on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, I was so excited to connect with you because you have this amazing background. And not only do you work in an area that is very male dominated, you and I both know that being in the OR, in the orthopedic field, but you just have had this amazing upbringing experience in a number of different fields. You have these awesome interests that I'm like personally so curious about. I cannot wait to kind of dive in. But what I always like to start with is I like to talk to the women on the show about their upbringing and kind of what really shaped them through their childhood and through their young adulthood to make them who they are today. So let's go way back and let's start there.
All right. So my parents are unique. I definitely did not grow up like most kids. We had a 25-acre horse farm. My
Oh,
dad
wow.
was an emergency room doctor. My mom was a labor and delivery nurse. My parents were both very, very, very driven individuals. They both had their own independent passions. My dad was into spearfishing, surfing, anything that involved the ocean. My mom, horses, competitive. She bred horses. She grew up on a farm herself. She was a competitive bodybuilder. She was just a very strong woman, but also very kind. And I just don't think I had an option of the things that I was taught and I learned and I picked up along the way. It was, this is, you want to do it? Absolutely. I wanted to be just like my dad. I admired him. One of his greatest interests was actually overseeing emergency medical services in where I grew up, Daytona Beach, so Volusia County. And I was privy to a lot of things that most children wouldn't see their dad do. And it always cracked me up. My mom said I used to get in trouble when I would go to school and they'd have, the before Father's Day, we'd say why my daddy is a hero. And I guess I'd make snide remarks to the other kids like, no, Laura, your father's a real estate agent. He's not really a hero. And my dad saves people. So
So boom, mic drop.
I had, I was always really proud of my dad. My mom too just taught me to be such a strong woman. I'll never forget when we were kids, we were at a lake with a bunch of her girlfriends and something was wrong with the trailer hitch. And my mom just picked up the trailer and popped it on over to the hitch and everyone was mind blown. And I just always had such strong individuals giving me such a great example of who to be when I grow up.
Did you have siblings?
I did. I have a younger brother.
And did
And
you feel like you were both kind of held up to the same standards, or were you ever treated differently growing up?
he's the baby. If anything, he was the favorite. He was coddled a bit more than me.
Yeah, yeah. As I've talked to women on this podcast, I've really noticed that there is a common theme among these women, and that is how our parents kind of shape our worldviews and sort of what, when we're little, how our parents are permissive or not permissive, how strict they are, what the messages are that they give us as far as what restraints we need to put upon ourselves. And a lot of these women like yourself, who are just trailblazers in their fields, had parents that said you can do whatever you want and didn't cut the women slack growing up.
That was the case growing up until I was a teenager.
Ah,
Growing up with the horses, that was all I knew. It's what I loved. So at a very young age, I was like, I want to go to the Olympics. I want to be a professional
mhm.
rider. That's all that matters to me. So when I decided I don't need an education, I'm going to go to the Olympics. You don't need a college degree for that. When I decided to drop out and get my GED and pursue a professional riding career, that the limits began, and there was they were not supportive over it, but they were, in a sense. They're like, hey, you're going to go out and do this on your own. We're not financially backing you. You're not going to go to college, so now you're a working adult. Best of luck to you.
And so is that, you mentioned to me when we talked beforehand that you had moved to Germany for a little while. Is that when you moved to Germany, or kind of bring me up to that point in your life?
Yes. Oh boy, just the road to even get to Germany. They wouldn't even pay for my plane ticket to get there, so I would do whatever I could. I galloped racehorses. At the time, we were living in Ocala. I was very fortunate enough. My parents made sacrifices to help me and foster my riding career, but I think they wanted me to do it in a more traditional sense, like
Mhm.
join a college, ride on their equestrian team, get a degree, then continue on. So, when I realized, okay, I have to go to Europe, this is what is going to put me above the rest of the competition, there was no support. So I galloped
Wow.
racehorses. There is a show called the Royal Lipizzaner Stallions that travels around America. I rode for them until I had enough money for a ticket. The day I had enough money for a ticket and just enough money to survive, I gave him a handshake, my 2 weeks notice, and caught a flight from Vancouver, Canada to Hamburg, Germany.
Wow. And what was that like going to I'm assuming you had not lived outside the US before then. You moved to Germany.
Other than spending summers in the Bahamas, my dad would have a little clinic here or there. He'd work. No, it was an eye opener. I realized I had had a pretty easy life, and my work ethic was not as strong as I thought it was.
So you basically bootstrapped it to Germany to go ride competitively, chase that dream. You showed up with like basically a couple bucks in your pocket. What was that experience like? Where did you
You know,
live? Who did you know anybody?
I didn't know anyone.
You were
I didn't know
18.
anyone. Yeah, I did not know a single person. I had my boots. I had my boot bag. I had a suitcase and my saddle, and that's all I went over there with. And it was tough. It was hard. To them, I was low, and I had to start from the low man
Wow.
on the totem pole point. And I worked 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. I moved there in November, and I'd grown up in Florida. I'm not aware of these, cold weather countries where the sun never shines. um,
Oh, wow.
I really learned it was the best and the worst experience of my life, if that can
Yeah.
make sense.
Yeah.
It gave me such character and such life lessons, especially just really what a work ethic is. You think you work hard and you think you can do better, but you can
Mhm.
always do better. And
Yeah.
that's what the Germans taught me, was even when I thought I was doing a good job and get beat down, it's like, why did I'm trying so hard? I could always get a little bit better. And it was
Right.
amazing in the end how much I learned from these people and their culture and their favorite. I still say this saying, even to my associate reps: work hard, party harder. I'm not saying that you can't have fun, but you have to earn it, and you have to, just like I said, tighten up the bootstraps and put the time in. And that's what really will separate anyone from success: is how hard are you willing to work for it.
Right. How many years did you spend in Germany?
I did 1 year
Uh-huh.
before I was just ready. I was homesick. It was a
Yeah.
lonely time. and I wanted to go out and see what I had learned. You know, the Germans were notoriously famous for, you know, show jumping was my, you know, discipline of choice.
Mhm.
And they were always dominating. They always were top in the Olympics and the World Games. And I said, you know, one of my favorite quotes I ever heard from the famous fighter George St. Pierre is surround yourself with experts if you want to
Mhm.
be an expert.
Mhm.
So I thought, you know, I've done a year. I'm Miss Florida. I'm cold. I'm lonely. Let's see what I can do. And I came back.
And you came back, and that was not without you came back with a lot more experience, a lot more grit, but it wasn't without challenges. Now tell me what happened when you came back. You mentioned that you had a pretty bad accident.
Yes. So at the time, I decided I was tired of working for people. I felt like I could have better opportunities. I always noticed it was, you know, the head trainer's daughter or girlfriend that would get the nice horses. And, you
Mhm.
know, I really had to beg and work for it. So I went out on my own and I found small private farms that maybe had a problematic horse that, you know, came off an injury, or, you know, maybe it had a little quirk here and there that the other big trainers didn't want to take, but it had the potential. I used to call it, I liked resurrecting, you know,
Mhm.
the fallen. And just one day, at a horse show, I was actually, I think I was right at the beginning of my course. The horse lost its footing right after the jump and fell on me and crushed my
Wow.
foot, drugged me, and I sustained a Lisfranc fracture and tore my ACL.
Wow.
And I still have not repaired my ACL to this day. We won't go there. But
Wow.
it really gave me this sense of you know, before ignorance is bliss, they say. And
Right.
I didn't realize how hurt I could get until this happened.
I am sure, and I mean, that was a situation in which, you ended up with some musculoskeletal pretty significant musculoskeletal injuries, but gosh, you could have died,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And, for the listeners who don't know what a Lisfranc is, I think most people have heard of ACL injuries in the knee. A lot of athletes get that, but Lisfranc injuries are devastating injuries. And the fact that you've come back from that and had the career as a spearfisher, EMT, and we'll get to all of that is pretty amazing. But basically, and I have a partner who's a foot and ankle surgeon, and she'll appreciate this. The foot is this incredibly intricate and complicated structure. I mean, you've got all these little bones in the foot and they all key in together. And so a Lisfranc injury can be like a dislocation or a fracture or a ligamentous sprain involving this part of the foot that keystones together, kind of like in stone masonry, and so you disrupt one of those little bricks or one of those little slabs of stone, and it really just affects your ability to walk and run and jump. And so I think that a lot of people don't, it's not very commonly talked about. The Lisfranc injury, you talk to an orthopedic or surgeon or somebody who's familiar with it, they go, ooh, that's a bad one. And so you had a really, really bad foot injury and obviously your ACL tear. And how did you, I mean, that's obviously like a big disappointment. It's a big injury, or set of injuries. How did you literally and figuratively get up from that and
Not well.
get back
Not
to living?
Not well. You know, I luckily I did not require surgery for it. But I remember, you know, first they sent me in for X-rays, and at the time I was back in Ocala living with my parents, and my dad came with me. They took me up to Gainesville, at I believe it was one of the university hospitals, and you know, they took an X-ray, and you know, Dr. Jaffe, I still remember his name, and he was palpating my foot, and, and he's like, you know, this isn't right. Just for what it's showing, let's go get a CT scan. And when they took, I'll never forget sitting in there when they went for the CT and hearing everyone go, oh, and I was like, oh,
Oh,
this
no.
can't be good. And all of my metatarsals just were crushed, just these tiny
Yeah.
little fractures that the X-ray didn't pick up.
Oh,
And
boy.
that was when I realized how bad it was. I think I was non-weight bearing for almost 5 months
Wow.
at that time.
Wow. That is a really long time. And that was a point after which in your recovery you ended up pivoting, right?
I
Tell me
did.
about
I
that.
I floundered around for a bit. I kept trying. No athlete gives up a dream. And for anyone listening, this says riding horses is not a sport. I
Clearly it
challenge you.
is.
I challenge you to go or get on a horse. For any athlete, when you dedicate your entire life to something, and in a split second, everything changes and your mindset changes. I suddenly just questioned myself, like my heart. I lost my heart. I'll never forget talking to my old trainer from Germany. And he's like, "Summer, you have no heart anymore. It's time to move on." So I
Wow.
tried some other disciplines here and there, and I floundered around, and I'll never forget the day when I was like, this isn't for me. I'm not going to make it. I'm not happy. I'm not enjoying. I tried some Western disciplines and some other things, and it was never what I had set my heart out on. And I was lost. I mean, for probably a good year, I bartended, and I was just, it was kind of sad. I remember my mom looking at me like, oh, maybe you should go to beauty school, just trying to give any idea. And I had my GED. Like it wasn't like I was the stellar student. I had dropped out to go pursue a career, and I wanted to be an Olympic rider. And it was a very, very low point in my life.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget. It was New Year's Day. I had finished a really bad bar shift. People were just horrible to me the night before, and I was walking in the produce aisle of the grocery store, and for some reason, I just had this flashback of when my dad used to work with all of the EMS and my hometown and the firefighters. And I remember watching him do the rope rescue and swift water retrieval. And when Hurricane Katrina came through, he deployed with all of them when he was out there for
Mhm.
3 weeks, trying to
Mhm.
rescue these people. And I always thought I've always been an adrenaline junkie, and I couldn't figure out what I would want to do. And, I wanted to go to the Olympics. I wanted to be a hero. I wanted that lifestyle. And just out of the blue, I was like, maybe I'll be a firefighter. Let me start with EMT. Let's see how I feel about EMT school. And
Mhm.
I didn't even tell my parents because I didn't want anyone to tell me. When I was a kid, I used to be like, I want to be a paramedic. It's such a cool job. I want to fly on the helicopters. And my dad would be like, I don't pay that well. You're gonna go to college and do something better. And I didn't want their approval or disapproval. And
Right.
I think the day before I started, I was like, hey guys, can I borrow some money to buy my uniforms?
And then off you went.
Off I went. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's all downhill from there.
When do you think when you started EMT school that you felt like you were righting the ship again after feeling lost for a year?
I felt like I had a purpose.
Yeah.
It was a little humbling because I wasn't the best student in school. I always just kind of felt, I always had, I wouldn't necessarily say a problem with authority, but I just never liked how they treated, kids like we were just, these ignorant beings that didn't know what we were doing. So school was never my thing. It was like, when can I get off? And I eventually ended up homeschooling just so I could travel and show my horses. I really did
Mhm.
forego the traditional teenage lifestyle. So I never really learned how to study, and let alone just general subjects. But in EMT, it was, there's two right answers, but only one correct answer. And if you scored under an 80, that's a fail.
Wow.
So I failed my first test, and that
Mhm.
was like, whew, I just remember like driving home. At that time, I was living in Orlando, and I drove home to visit my mom. They had moved back to Daytona. I remember just like laying on her floor, like just defeated.
Mhm.
And I got up and I said, you know what? I'm going to figure out how to pass this test. And I went back and they let me retake it. I scored 100.
Wow.
And it was then I was like, okay, all right, let me check out the kids who are scoring well here and let me partner up with them. And that's when I started to learn about like camaraderies and seeking mentors and, you
Mhm.
know, leaning on each other and actually developing study habits that I never had because
Yeah, you were learning to learn.
yeah, I had never learned that. My type of learning was how to be a better rider, how to
Mhm.
conquer mental, how to keep it together in competition. I never cared about how to learn how to memorize or how to take tests. passed just enough that my parents wouldn't ground me so I could keep showing horses, you know?
Do you think in exploring that and kind of figuring out how to learn in the school setting, and when you were in EMT school, that you ended up finding, did you find parallels in in that situation compared to how you tackled the riding and the jumping?
Absolutely. Especially for me, it was, I really excelled in the clinical aspect.
Mhm.
I was never afraid to walk up when the doctor said, "All right, come on, who wants to come and take the vitals?" And, everyone else would kind of sit in the back. I was like, heck, let me in there. And then it became a competition. I wanted to be the best.
Mhm.
And then that's when my competitive nature started to come out, and the test scores got higher. My instructor started telling me, hey, you should consider nursing school or med school. It's not too late. I did see parallels, and I had a purpose again. And
Mhm.
I that competitive nature still drives me in everything I do to this day. So there's definitely parallels. And for me in school, I wanted to be the best. Once I learned how to become the best, and the tools and the mindset, I wanted to be the best. And without a doubt, it paralleled with my previous, lifetime.
And you transitioned from EMT to firefighting, another
Yeah.
field that does not have a lot of women.
Yes. I had some female friends that were firefighters.
Yeah.
Um, I had thought in the back of my mind, like, I survived Germany. I've done this. This is going to be a walk in the park. And I actually was accepted. So we have what's called a combat challenge to be able to get into fire academies. And
Mhm.
it consists of you in full gear on air. And you have to do things like throw a ladder, drag a charged hose, deploy the hose. The most arduous, it's called the sled. And I believe just the sledgehammer itself must weigh 30 pounds. And we have to hammer this sled where we're going overhead, and it will just wear you out. And then you have to go up, 5 flights in a high rise drill with a hose on your back. And then you have to do the dummy drag. And these dummies are just ergonomically not friendly. And the average dummy weighed around 150, 160 pounds, which
Yeah.
was kind of being kind if you think about it, when the
Right.
average human you're dragging.
The human bodies are not very ergonomically friendly to drag around in general, right?
Yeah. So I the first academy I tried out for, Central Florida Fire Academy, which is notoriously a very traditional, old school, all male academy. I got in.
Mhm.
Uh, in their history, I think me and three other girls had
Wow.
graduated from it. The academy has actually now been dissolved because of the amount of deaths from students from heat exhaustion and other,
Wow.
related training related injuries, that it actually is no longer around. But
Mhm.
it was tough. Um,
Mhm.
Gonna compare it to Germany. Best and worst experience of my life. And
Yeah.
that's where I really started to learn, riding horses, we were all equals. It was how much bravery you had, how much finesse, we competed as equals. This was the first time people looked down on me for my sex, my
Mhm.
size, my stature. You can't do this job.
Right.
Um, and
And they really
once again,
challenged you in that.
oh yeah.
Tell me one of the examples of how you were treated differently because you were female and you had to prove yourself.
Um, One of my favorite stories was just the guys in general would bully me, and they're like, she's never going to be able to pull a body out of the fire. And I mean, this was even my instructors. And I never want to trash the fire services, but a lot of firefighters are people that just didn't know what to do with their lives. And that's what they did. And they ran with it, and it became their identity, and almost like this kind
Mhm.
of boys club bullying, hazing. And hired a personal trainer. And I believe he weighed like 200, 220 at the time. And he's like, I'm going to teach you how to carry me over your shoulder. It's like all body mechanics. And they would do things like, oh, she can't do this. They would wait and let me go in the heat of the day because they wanted me to fall out.
Yeah.
We have to go through 3 combat challenges. So they would place me, and they'd always say, we're going alphabetical. It's not you, sorry, your last name's Shed. And they'd say, she's never going to drag that body. She's never going to drag that body. they'd give us the option, hey, flip it over your shoulder if you want. And I quietly never let them know what I was working on. And I got up to the dummy, I took it and flipped it over my shoulder and
Mm-hmm.
walked by, and the guys were like, what the heck is she on? This kid, she's having a good day. So we do burns, they'd put us in these burn buildings, and they wanted to see if we could take the heat, literally and figuratively.
Yeah.
And they'd always put me on the front. Hey, put Shed. Shed's going to sit in the front. Shed's going to go on the front. Let Shed do it. Um, just little things, the tiny microaggressions, the sexism. I could never go out with the boys because we got slightly inebriated. Someone was trying to hit on me. I was always told, oh, well, affirmative action, they were resentful of me. Oh, you're a
Right.
female. Of course you're going to get a job.
Right.
This was during the time, following 9/11, everyone wanted to be a firefighter, everyone. And it was just, they had such recognition and respect following what they did. It was tough, especially if you were a white male. And they constantly were like, Shed, doesn't matter. It's not like you've earned it. It's not like of course you're going to get a job. They never once, even though I tested the highest, I was always at least in the middle of the pack physically. I mean, I had ex-athletes. I had guys that were, 6'7", just monsters that would throw that dummy around and, finish the sled in 3 swings. So I was always just constantly told, like, you're not really earning this. And I almost, to a sense, they made me believe I didn't really deserve it.
Yeah.
And it just made me want to work harder.
What do you think makes somebody decide to work harder in that setting when they're faced with that versus just saying, forget it, I quit?
I think everyone is different. We had a lot of people quit
Mm-hmm.
because they couldn't handle it. I had been through so much already, and I'd quit. And I remember how bad it felt. Feeling like a quitter, feeling like I didn't have the heart to go on.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was what always drove me, was just thinking back to, that life I was a failure on. And I swore I'd never let it happen again. I think a lot of people, we do have easy lives compared to, I did, at least, the average American, we're not living out there in these third world countries. We don't know what struggle is. We don't know how to dig deep and find that internal fortitude. And I wanted to prove them all wrong. Once again, it's like that chip on my shoulder I developed, towards the end after my accident. It was always, you're not good enough. You don't have heart, summer, time to hang it up. And it just, I wanted to be the best. Once again, it goes back to like competitive. I'll show you. I always had this like, I'll show you attitude. I just wanted
Right.
someone to believe in me.
Right. How do you encapsulate all of that toughness, both that physical toughness, that mental toughness, and how do you marry that with being I want to say this the right way, but being female and still embracing all of the amazing and wonderful things about being a woman without being apologetic for everything that you are, right? Because sometimes when we see this as women in male dominated fields, we'll see women who are tough and kind of make it through, but then it's almost like they have to give up another part of themselves to make them less woman to make it. And how do you
Yeah,
marry that and still hang on to the parts of you that are, you know, definitely female or traditionally thought of as female, right?
you know, you have to stay true to yourself. And women are some of the most adaptable creatures on the planet that I don't think people understand. And I'm not going to, and I've seen women, especially in the police force and fire academy. I had another friend, she was beautiful blonde. When she got hired by her department, she dyed her hair brunette. She was like, I don't want, but we weren't, they kept it. We weren't allowed to wear makeup to work. We had
Mhm.
very strict guidelines on what we were allowed. So they almost tried to like stifle that femininity. And I'll never really understand why, because if they said, hey, you can't be too pretty, you know, we don't want people wanting to sleep with you, or we don't want, patience and, people you're rescuing think you can't do the job because the way you look. Obviously, they'd have a, human resources nightmare on their hands.
Right. Exactly.
But, I just, when I went to work that day and put that uniform on, I was a Summer the firefighter. And when I came home, yeah, I put on my fake eyelashes and lipstick and went out with my girlfriends. It's women have so much power in their femininity. And I hate that we're made to feel that we can't possess this duality and do both. We
Right.
can. And
Right.
if there's one thing I want women to know is you can be beautiful and just as strong as the man sitting next to you, and not give up anything that makes you feel good about yourself. Go buy that lipstick, girl. Like, go get your fake eyelashes, bleach your hair. As long as you go do the best of your ability and don't use it to get ahead of the game and cut corners, you combine it. It makes you the most powerful being in the world, being able to use both of those,
I th- I
qualities.
I see a book title in there. Go buy that lipstick, girl. I love it. So you eventually made the transition into medical device sales, and how did you, now there's another field, just like we were talking about, like orthopedic surgery, also not a lot of women. How did you end up getting introduced to that, and what was your experience kind of getting the foot in the door and ascending to where you are now, in which you are amazingly successful in your field? You're kind of an ass kicker, from what I understand. So tell me a little bit about that transition in your life.
Um, so, while I was going through my whole transition of becoming a firefighter and, going through my probationary year, my parents actually went through a pretty bad divorce. And
Mm,
it really hurt me watching my dad just be so alone. And at that time, it was right around the housing market crisis. People were losing their jobs. It's kind of funny. People always go in times of economic stress or strain or, politics. People always go after public services, police, fire. And they started to, take away from us, defund us. They started taking us from 4-man engines to 2-man engines. For the people that don't understand what we do as a firefighter, there's an engineer that's working the pump, and then there's a lieutenant and 2 firefighters that we go in. There's, one firefighter on the hose, another firefighter backing it up, and the lieutenant leading us through the way. I mean, I've been in situations before where I was pushed so far down to the ground that when I came out, my helmet was melting. I
mm,
have fallen through roofs before where if my partner wasn't there to help me, who knows what would have happened. So they started by, cutting down our trucks to 3-man trucks. And the next thing it was just, an engineer and a lieutenant. And it was, if we were on a rescue, it was just a medic and a firefighter, and things became dangerous and people started to get hurt. And then they started coming for our pension. And at the time, we did not make much money. I could have made more money flipping burgers at McDonald's,
mhm.
but I did it because I wanted to be the hero. I love the passion. I still say to this day, the one thing I miss the most is the feeling when you look at someone truly that is having a heart attack and knows that they are going to die. The look on their face when they see you walk through that door is a look that no ER doctor, no surgeon will ever see. It's the most rawest form of just someone saying, just being vulnerable.
Right.
And I love that. I love, in the bad car accidents, crawling in to start an IV on them and just seeing this person, upside down, bleeding, mangled, saying, oh my God, someone's here to help me. I'll never forget the first time I did a pleural decompression, and this poor guy is just, I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. And when I finally decompressed him and he just looked up at me, and it was such an instance, nothing can ever replace that feeling of being a hero. And
Right.
even as much as I love that feeling, feelings don't pay bills and give you retirement.
Mhm.
And when they started to really come after us, and now there was the danger, there's not someone there to help me, and I'm not going to have a pension. And the rate of firefighters that what we die from, heart disease, from the stress, just the cortisol we experience. I mean, if you imagine being in a REM phase of your sleep and 2 o'clock in the morning, tones go off so loud.
Mhm.
um, the PTSD that we experience from the death of children, it all, the smoke inhalation, the types of cancers, the things that are burning in the fires, to put it short, the juice wasn't worth the squeeze.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, my dad needed me. He was lonely. I needed a change. And I was, you know, I had a couple family members that worked in devices. I always thought it was such a cool thing. I'm like, wait a minute, you're telling me you guys are going into the OR and you're telling surgeons like how to use your stuff? I mean, you're in there in the surgery, and it just seemed like such a cool. And I've heard all these stories about, you know, like bad pediatric car accidents and spinal trauma, and the rep being the hero because, you know, they suggested something different. And I was like, hey, you know, this, you know, and at the time, you know, I didn't think I was good enough for med school. You know, I didn't think that far into it, but thought, oh, you know, maybe, you know, PA school, nursing school. So I'm but devices just seemed like the right thing. And I wanted to keep my options open. The thought of a business degree just made me sick. So I
Mm-hmm.
moved down to South Florida to be with my dad, and I enrolled at Florida International University, and I did a double major in bio and psych,
Wow.
and I loved it. I worked, bartended the whole time. I did 12 credits every semester, no semesters off. I graduated with my sciences with a 4.0 GPA. I ended up magna cum laude with a 3.9 GPA.
That's awesome.
Everyone said go to med school, go to med school, go to med school. And honestly, I still to this day was a little scared, you know, because I wanted to be an orthopedic surgeon or, you know, do something, you know, really profound. And I was a little scared, you know, at that time I was I was 31 or 31 when I finished, you know, and it wasn't right. It just didn't feel right in my heart, you know, and the devices made sense. And I just went for it, and everyone tried to turn me away. Everyone said, you're crazy. Listen, not a women's world. Why don't you go sell like gynecological, or, you know, maybe you could get into, you know, like cardiac, work in the cath lab. Maybe you sell some biologics, you know, capital equipment, you know, maybe you can sell disposables, but it's not really for you. Orthopedics is a man's world. And, you know, most of the women end up sleeping with their surgeons and, you know, wash out. So
Wow.
that was my like
Yeah.
welcome into the
Yeah.
industry.
Yeah. So a lot of people telling you why you shouldn't do it.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
everyone. And
What made you
I didn't
press
listen.
on? You didn't listen.
I just Same people told me I couldn't be a firefighter. And
Yeah.
once again, I think I take it back to that chip on my shoulder from people
Mhm.
saying, "Hey, you lost your heart. Can't be a horse trainer anymore. It's not going to happen. You can't do it. You don't have your brain's broken." Um, I just was tired of people telling me what I can and can't do, and I found my opportunities. You know, I applied, and, you know, I met this guy that was a customer at my bar, and I could tell he was trying to hit on me, and he's like, "Oh, I work for such and such," and I'm looking at this guy. I'm like, this chunk with the emotional intelligence of a lunchbox that's just sitting here bragging to me about, you know, how much money he makes, the car he drives. I was like, there's no way this guy has the emotional intelligence or is savvy enough to go into the OR and commit himself to being an asset. I was like, if you can do it, I can. And I found the name of the distribution. You know, I kept asking him questions. Like, who do you work for? You know, he's like, you know, I was like, I do this and this. I was like, yeah, but, you know, who do you work for? You know, I was like, I don't care what you sell. Who do you work for? And finally he admitted it. And I Googled it and I found the address, and I drove up there and I said, hey, I don't know if you guys are hiring, but I want to sell medical devices and I think I'd be good at it. And I'll never forget so the owner of the distribution looked at me and was like, I'm hiring, but I'm not hiring females anymore. I've been there, done that. It's just not been a good route.
Wow.
And I was like, I'm
Oh my
different.
gosh.
I was like, I'm different. And he's like, really, how? And I gave him my story, and it kind of caught his ear a little bit. And he's like, listen, it's not an industry for you. Like, when do you want to have kids? Do you want to have kids? Because you can't have kids in this industry. And I was just like,
Man, like hand the guy a shovel. He's just like digging himself deeper into like an illegal line of questioning, right? And we know it's illegal, but it happens all the time. It happens all the
yeah.
time.
And, you know, I was like, I don't care. I was like, I'll give me whatever. And traditionally, he would give a guarantee of $5,000 a month to his reps, all of his male reps that were started. After begging, I braided him, I believe, for 2 weeks. He finally gave me a shot and gave me a salary of $2,500 a month. It wasn't even enough to
Wow.
pay my rent in South
Oh my
Florida.
gosh.
And I took it. I took it and I said, I'm gonna be your best rep one day. And he laughed at me. And that's when I got my start. I was selling Acumed trauma, a company called Lima, total joints, orthofix spine, and just some various, like some carbon fiber X fixes and just whatever little lines this guy would pick up. And I did become his best rep and one of his favorite employees, and other people noticed. And it
Mhm.
was, I think it was like 8 months into it working for him, people started to notice. And within a year, Globus approached me on the recommendation from a surgeon
Mhm.
saying, hey, you're really good with spine. And it was just, once again, I take it back to the fire department. You know, the personalities that work in orthopedics and
Right.
neurosurgery. Some of them at times are very calm, peaceful individuals. And other times when things don't go their way, you know, you're having Cobb elevators thrown at your head. And he just admired that I never backed down. You know,
Yeah.
and I think it was from the fire department, just the abuse and the hazing that I went through. You can't hurt me. And I still tell anyone, read that book. You Can't Hurt Me. That is such a fantastic book. Any of these listeners, go get that book right now. And he recognized it. And not only did he recognize it, but he wanted to make me better. And I'll never forget, he used to stack up the stools and say, all right, Summer, you know, you're going to put your hands behind your back. You're going to wrap yourself in the sterile gown and keep your hands behind your back. And you're going to look over and I'm going to point and teach me the anatomy and show me the nerve root and show me, you
That's
know, this is
awesome.
Camden's triangle and this is the thecal sac. And just really was, you know, that was my first person in my corner. Dr. Blumberg, he was an orthopedic surgeon in Fort Lauderdale. Still to this day, Dr. Blumberg, if you're listening, thank you. He was the one that recommended me to Globus, and
Mhm.
I think it took 48 hours worth of interviews. They hired me.
Wow. That's amazing. And I love hearing about stories of just good mentorship, whether it's a woman or a man. I think it's important to have somebody in your corner, you know, and I think with more and more women in orthopedics and growing in other fields where it's traditionally not a lot of women, you know, there is a really vital importance to women's associations and women's groups, right? Because there is that camaraderie, I think that's important among women, but I think what's important not to miss is that you gotta have advocates for you that are men and women. You know, you can't just it can't just be the ladies, we're all gonna get together and we're gonna be awesome and, you know, and that's great, but and that's needed. However, like, and you know, going into the locker room at the hospital, who's going to be the one to speak up when there's misbehavior or something that is said that is totally inappropriate in the other locker room if you don't have advocates that are both men and women? And so I think that the whole idea of women and equity in medicine or in surgery or in any field, it's imperative to have people who have your back, no matter
Absolutely,
men or women, right? And
absolutely.
so you're still with Globus and now you're in Houston, right?
Hmm.
And tell me where you are now. Tell me what your biggest challenges are now.
I mean, I think my biggest challenge now, I mean, you know, when I was down in South Florida, I worked so hard to break through to, you know, business that competitive companies had held on for years. I worked with some of the biggest names in neurosurgery and orthopedics, you know, Mike Wang, Stephen Vanny, Alan Levy, you know, Frank Eismont, just people that were very well respected, Joe July. And when Houston noticed what I was able to do there, they said, hey, we need your help here. And I was like, this is it. You know, Houston's $130 million spine market alone. I'll never forget my first time I went into the med center. It was like that scene from Mary Tyler Moore when she was in the city spinning around. I was like, where am I? Like, this is the most incredible place I have ever seen in my life. And March 1st, I signed my contract. And I believe it was about 14 days later, we had the shutdown from the coronavirus.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Right
Yeah.
now, I don't know what it's going to be like. It's a whole new world.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of
I
us feel that way. Yeah.
I don't know what to. I really don't know. Traditionally, I would build my business by picking up trauma call and going into hospitals saying, hey, like I'm I might not be your A team, but let me be the B team. If Medtronic or Depew or Stryker or whoever your guy is just too far away that day that you have that trauma come through at 1 o'clock in the morning, give me a chance. And the only way we could do that is going into offices and going through the hospitals. And now everything's been shut down. We can't do that. The only time I'm
Right.
allowed in is if I have a case that I'm being called for. So now I'm having to be so much more strategic. And I've actually started reading The Art of War just to try to inspire myself to new ways to adapt to this new world because we don't know. Before, I used to be able to host cadaver labs and support residency programs, and
Mhm.
all of that's shut down. We can't do that.
I I
So
think that
I don't
we're
know.
yeah, I mean, I think that we're in kind of a really weird place, and I'll mention to the listeners because this will have been pre-recorded that we're, still kind of in the height of the pandemic. And wouldn't it be nice if by the time this was released, look back and say, yeah, that's what it was like then, and now we're, you know, getting back to normal, but who knows? And I personally try to think about, how can we look at these obstacles and look at these challenges and find creativity and positivity within them, right? Because it's so important to have that mindset. Otherwise, you end up getting beat down and not knowing how to get back up and not knowing where to turn. And so, it sounds like you're already doing a lot of things to just pivot and to approach things differently.
Oh, I'm getting creative. I mean, I've luckily now, with the advent of social media and so many surgeons adapting, like, one of the most interesting webinars I sat in on was Mike Wang coaching. It was a bunch of residents. It was for if you were from your fifth year and on, and he was calling them the COVID generation. And he was talking about
Mhm.
how difficult it is now to be able to connect with patients through Zoom meetings.
Right.
And he said, there's going to be a change. There's going to be a change in healthcare. There's going to be a change in insurance. People are losing their jobs. He's like, you all have to get creative yourselves. And it really inspired me. And I was like, So I actually started sliding into people's DMs on LinkedIn that, hey, listen,
There you go. You
um,
gotta
my
do what
name
you
is
gotta do.
my name is Summer Shed. These are the products. I've researched this about your practice. If I might, if I have something that the other companies don't have that might give you a better outcome with one of your patients, keep me in mind.
Mhm.
I'm trying to make plans for the future. Resident labs, trying to help them make up for this lost time that they are also missing out on. I mean, your years are so crucial, especially before going into fellowship, and not being able to have these cases and whatnot are I think is setting back everyone. So I'm, like
Right.
you said, I'm just trying to be creative. What can I do? I constantly email the hospital administration, what can I do to make things better? What can I do to help you all out? Globus was so pause here, I'm losing the word for a second. Oh God, I I cannot just think of the word. I'm so sorry. I'm totally blanking.
That's okay. You have
When we
time.
when
We
you
can edit
when
this
we
out.
give, yeah, when so giving, so oh my gosh,
Generous.
well,
So
generous.
Globus
Oh,
was
I'm so
generous.
sorry.
That's okay.
Globus
Go ahead.
was,
Start again.
you know, one thing I was so fortunate. Globus was so generous during the COVID epidemic, and donating, giving us a certain amount of money, saying, okay, we're going to support the front line. If you see they need masks, we can provide these. Like, what can you do to what can we do to make it better for everyone?
That's great.
For the people that have been working all night long, we can bring them lunch. We can, I mean, there was just I remember hearing stories from the residents to where they're getting put on the COVID floors,
Yeah.
like, oh, well, you're not doing much. Well, you're still going to earn the salary that the hospital's giving you.
Right.
I mean, I have stories of nurses having to rewash masks. There was a couple of us that started programs where we were gathering the surgical drapes
Yeah.
and making masks out of them.
Yep.
And it was just trying to be an asset and come together.
Mhm.
And instead of fighting with competitive companies for give me this business, give me that, like, what can we all do to help? These people are, I'm not the anesthesiologist at the head of the bed, risking myself. Like, I'm just sitting in the back. I'm the safest. I'm not the one that's exposed to these people. What can we do to help them out? They don't have the resources. We have the resources. What can we do? And that was one of the biggest things that you stop thinking about the money and the competition and climbing that ladder of success. But like it's more of a humanitarian. Like we're all in this together. Like
Absolutely.
whether you're the nurse, the surgeon, the OR coordinator, what can I do to make your life better? And
Right.
that's what it's really brought a lot of people together. And I hope this mindset continues on even after this pandemic is over. Because at the end of the day, it's about patient care.
Right.
It's not
Absolutely.
about how much money you make. It's about the patient and what can we do to make it better and keep everyone safe.
So if you had one piece of advice for a woman who wanted to follow in your footsteps and do what you do, what would that be?
Go for it. Don't listen to anyone. We are so powerful and we can be so good in this industry because we possess this maternal instinct, this ability to read people, read the room that men don't have. Their egos often blind them. It's just the testosterone, their own hubris. It's just so difficult for them to see past. We can listen. We're the ones that can sit there. Women typically, we don't wait for our turn to talk. We listen. If you can combine that with the confidence that you are capable. I feel like so many people have, we discussed before imposter syndrome. So many people feel like they don't belong here, that they don't have a place here. You're
Mhm.
wrong. You're absolutely wrong. Are you smart? Can you study? Another book that anyone needs to read that wants to get into medical device sales is called The 10X Theory by Grant Cardone. And
Uh-huh.
it basically, the whole book just says work harder than the competition. You know what, gals, the competition are the men. And work harder, study harder, go to the gym. I'll never forget men looking at me saying, how can you do this job? You can't carry all of those trays. And this was at a training, and the people who knew me, who knew me well, you saw the men like back their chairs away and go, oh God, this poor guy has no idea what he just did to
Oh
himself.
boy.
Um,
So, where, if our listeners want to find you online, where can they find you and keep up with you and all the amazing stuff that you're doing?
you can find me on LinkedIn, Summer Shed. Summer spelled like the season, shed, like a garden shed, but with two D's. So I tell people how to find me. And I'm also on Instagram, same thing, at Summer Shed. And please reach out to me. I have young women all the time that graduate from the medical device college or just follow my page. And I've started to see how surgeons market themselves. I want to market myself. I want to inspire young women. Find me if you want to know how to get it out. Like, I'm happy to help you. I'll tell you what to do. I'll tell you the books to read. I'll tell you the steps to take. The Globus Women's Initiative we started, Women in Spine. I've started mentoring young women to come down and watch surgeries with me. No, we can do this together. I've saved multiple girls from losing their jobs because their area directors didn't think they had what it takes to stand up to these, difficult personalities in the
Mhm.
operating room. Reach out, look for someone, and if you make it, pay it forward. Like, don't sit
Absolutely.
there and think you're better or some woman doesn't deserve this because you like being the minority and you like being the unicorn. Pay it
Yeah.
forward. If you see someone with talent, help her. Like,
Yeah.
don't sit there and belittle her because women for some reason in our industries I've noticed want to hate on each other because they want to be the unicorn. They want to be the
Right.
unique one. They don't want to
Right.
help foster more to come in. We're
Mhm.
going to see a less change. We're going to see less disparities in the pay gap, and we're going to see more equality if there's more of us.
Yep.
And the only way there's going to be more of us is if we foster these people and bring them in and give them the right tools and we can be unstoppable. Female surgeons as well. I have so many female friends that are surgeons that are bullied and, gosh, their bedside manner rocks, rock compared to the other guys. I've seen some female neurosurgeons that specialize in cranie that are just absolute rock stars. And
Yeah.
if they can do it, anyone can do it. And I saw what they went through, and they were the top of their graduating residency, and they're the top and at the hospitals they're at. And there's female reps out there just like me that I look up to. One in particular, Jamie Yorst in New Orleans, is an absolute superstar, and I just want to be just like her. You know, everyone needs that person that they want to model themselves after, and I'm
Right.
happy to be that for anyone.
Well, you're definitely just being a great model of how one can pay it forward, and I'm so excited to share this episode with our listeners and really, really grateful that you took the time to talk to me today. Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you so much, Nancy.
All right. Well, that's a wrap. That was great.
I was
Thank
so
you.
nervous. I
Oh my
hope it was
gosh.
okay.